Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 25 that God will one day judge between us, separating us as a farmer separates sheep from goats. Now, some of you may be thinking that this is, well, a bit goatist, but I wonder what Jesus is telling us by using the image of a shepherd separating sheep from goats. Jesus told the story in the Middle East where there's a lack of pasture. And so out of necessity, sheep and goats have to graze together. But then come nightfall, the shepherd has to separate the sheep from the goats, because while the sheep are happy to be left out in the open, exposed and vulnerable, the goats need to be placed in their warm, comfortable and secure shelters. Perhaps in likening us to the sheep, Jesus wants to tell us that the Christian life is to be lived out in the open. That being a Christian leads to us being exposed and vulnerable, and that the warmth and the comfort and the security for which we may long could actually pave the way to destruction. So let's think about the sheep and the goats. Goats like the security of things around them. They like the warmth and the comfort of their shelters. And there are many of us for whom this is true. We need things around us. We often turn to material things to give us that sense of security for which we long. Nick Hornby, in his book High Fidelity, describes it as a sort of ballast that stops us floating away. He says, you need as much ballast as possible to stop you floating away. You need people around you, things going on. Otherwise, life is like some film where the money ran out and there are no sets or locations or supporting actors, and it's just one bloke on his own, staring into the camera with nothing to do and nobody to speak to. And who believe in this character then? And so he concludes, I've got to get more stuff, more clutter, more detail in here, because at the moment I'm in danger of falling off the edge. But the thing is this, and I think this has been particularly the case during the pandemic, the more we surround ourselves with stuff, then the more we realise that it isn't enough. Bernard Levin, the columnist, once said, countries like ours are full of people who have all the material comforts they desire, together with such non-material blessings as a happy family, and yet live lives of quiet and at times noisy desperation, understanding nothing but the fact that there is a hole inside them, and that however much food and drink they pour into it, however many motor cars and television sets they stuff it with, however many well-balanced children and loyal friends they parade around the edges of it, it aches. It is true, as Augustine said, that our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God. The beautifully poetic Thomas Kelly implored his readers, too long have we lingered in a double-minded obedience and dared not the certainties of God's love. For him do you seek, all you pearl merchants. He is the food of grown men. Hasten unto him who is the chief actor of the drama of time and eternity. It's not too late to love him utterly and obey him implicitly and be baptized with the power of the apostolic life. Stuff ain't going to save you. Your stuff, the stuff you surround yourself with, will never satisfy the existential longing that lies deep within your soul. We're made for God, and ultimately only God will satisfy the ache inside our heart. Now that brings me to the next point, that being a sheep rather than a goat doesn't just stop at renouncing the security of having things around you. It's also about being vulnerable. Sheep live life in the open. You know, when lockdown is over, we as Christians really need to get out more. And if we are really to serve our communities and help this country get back on its feet, then we're going to need to get out there. Some years ago in rural Warwickshire, there was a group of lovely elderly ladies who wanted to serve their community. But they didn't think that they were particularly gifted at children's work or youth work or evangelism. They did, however, know how to bake a cake. So every week they baked some cakes, put them in the back of their Vauxhall Corsa and drove to the children's playground, where of an evening the young people would gather. And these two women would serve cake and drinks to the young people and spend an hour or so talking with them. As things developed, somewhere between 50 and 100 young people were gathering. And they were talking with these women about life and about faith. And it was beginning to look like church, but a church without walls, a church turned inside out, a church out there living life in the open. But living life in the open is also about being personally vulnerable, open to the cries of others who are in need, moved by the pain and the suffering of the world, and willing to do something about it. Jesus uses the example of the hungry and the thirsty, and the homeless and the naked and the sick and those in prison. And he says that our response to them determines our salvation, or at least our response to them reveals whether we are a sheep or a goat. But Jesus also gives us some words of consolation and encouragement. When we do give food to the hungry, or drink to the thirsty, or when we take a stranger into our home, or clothe the naked, or help the sick, or when we visit someone in prison, then we find Jesus in the midst of them. What we do for the least of these, he says, we do also for him. Now, this isn't because Jesus conceals himself, rather like kings in those mythical tales who would dress as paupers and seek hospitality, and then when someone cares for them, they would reveal their true identity and bestow riches on the one who showed them kindness. No, it's because in doing these things, we're tuning our life into the life of Jesus. We're becoming like him. In his earthly life, Jesus had very few possessions. He found his sense of security in his relationship with God the Father. And other people really mattered to him: lepers, prostitutes, people with mental health issues, the disabled, the hated, the excluded, the poor. They all mattered to him, and he loved them. And Jesus was vulnerable, exposed. He lived life in the open, even allowing himself to be mistreated and misunderstood. We're living in extraordinary times. People are looking for hope. They're looking for answers to really big questions about life and purpose. And that is where the church comes in. The hope of our nation is to be found among you, as you live out your Christian life in the open, out there, exposed and vulnerable, and away from the warmth and the comfort and the security for which we may long. As you serve those in need, knowing that that is where Jesus is to be found. As you take the shattered, broken bits of what we are left with and carefully, reverently love them back to life. And as you do this, you will discover Jesus in the midst of it all. Jesus who says to us all ultimately, "Come, you that are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world."